Dave, heading into week 3, we've got 3 teams that are sitting at 0-2. Now, not necessarily a reason to panic quite yet, but of Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Hamilton, which team has the most reason to be concerned?
Well, I think it's got to be the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, just in terms of the gap of what we expect this team to look like and what they do look like through the first 2 weeks of the season. It's the Bombers. I mean, the Bombers right now are the worst offensive team in the CFL. And yes, they're missing Kenny Lawler, and they've been without Brady Oliveira part of the season as well. But, I talked to a coach in the CFL. I said, what do you see in the Bombers right now? He said, I don't see any of the physicality that you associate with that team. He called it non-existent, said their energy was down. And as a result, the aura around this team that, they just psychologically get into other teams' heads, that's not there anymore. And, not to go to the obvious, but they're -5 in the turnover ratio. That's worst in the CFL. That's a big part of their 0-2 start.
Yeah, but you've got to take a look at their injuries and use that as context. And you mentioned Brady Oliveira. He is going to play this week, but he's not currently listed as a starter, still dealing with a knee injury, and he's barely practiced. And that's reflective of a number of Bombers as they go through training camp, and it just hasn't necessarily been the same in terms of their health and preparedness heading into the season. Dietrich Nichols also isn't going to play this week, and Dalton Schoen has missed some practice time, among others. So, when you go through the league stats in terms of fewest man games lost in previous years, the Bombers are at the top of that list. I mean, they have been unbelievably healthy, and you have to believe that once they get healthy again, they're going to be able to turn their season around. Hamilton is the interesting one to me. So many questions for this team coming into this season, just for me, because of a lack of weapons amongst their receiving core. And also, we didn't know what Bo Levi Mitchell was going to look like. And quite frankly, we haven't seen peak Bo since before the pandemic. And we are seeing that right now. He's had back-to-back 300-yard games. He's mobile, spry, moving around, actually taking off with the football. And they just have to eliminate some drops, primarily from their number one target, Tim White, because he was the one person in the receiving core that wasn't a question coming into the season. But he had a big drop for a touchdown in the first half against Saskatchewan, then another key drop that leads to an interception, and the game-winning points had some against Calgary too. So if White can clean that up, I think this offense is showing some pretty good signs of life right now through 2 weeks, maybe unexpectedly.
The Edmonton Elks are 0-2 for the 3rd consecutive season under Chris Jones, but this is a much more competitive version of this team than we've seen the last couple of years early on. I mean, they had a 10-point lead over Saskatchewan in the 4th quarter. They let that get away and then lost to the defending Grey Cup champion Montreal Alouettes by a field goal. 2 stats that matter in football: explosive plays and turnovers. The Elks are on the wrong side of both those stats compared to their opposition. I think if they can turn that around, this is still a team that can bank some wins in the near future.
Yeah, but what we've seen through the first 2 weeks is they've found ways to lose. You mentioned that 10-point lead in the final 3 minutes, and they led in the second half against Montreal. And now they've got some pretty tough matchups coming. You've got Toronto, who looked very good in their Week 1 win against BC. They've got a very solid defensive line. I think Edmonton's offensive line is suspect with a McLeod Bethel-Thompson that you're trying to protect that isn't necessarily the most mobile. So if they lose that, then they go to BC in Week 4. You don't want to show up to Week 5 at 0-4 because a number of players at that point, given the fact this team has won just 8 games in the last 2+ seasons, they're going to get into that here we go again mentality. So it is critical that Edmonton finds a way to stem the bleeding right now and get some early success.